Welcome to the Candid Talk Show. Gossips here is true, like I see through, topic that you can relate to. I'm Julia. I'm your host for today's talk show, and let me remind you about the words that education is not preparation for life. It is the life itself by John Dewey. So, here's our guest, Miss Antoinette Process, that will give us information about the education during the Greek period.
As the Athenians should be born as a boy to able to get a proper education, while the girls learn skills only for managing the household. Also focus more on the education of the rounded development of every individual and educated to be good citizens of Greece and have a balanced book learning and physical training. The next is the Spartans. It can be composed with both genders to focus on the development of soldiers and military leaders. And lastly, all educated to protect the city site.
We gain a wonderful idea about education during the Greek time. But wait, there's more. We have here another guest via online. Let us welcome Miss Janice Lim that will teach us how's educational system during Roman time.
The Roman period. The Roman period was based on the classical Greek tradition but infused with Roman politics, cosmology, and religious beliefs. The only children to receive formal education were the children of the rich. The extremely rich families even employed private tutors to teach their children. The Roman way of education focused more on the development of a sense of civic responsibility and the development of administrative and military skills as citizens of the Roman Empire. In general, schools in the Roman Empire, as we would recognize them, were only for boys. The education in the early years of ancient Rome was rather informal. It was usually the responsibility of the fathers to teach their children all that they needed to know in the comfort of their homes. There are three stages of Roman education. The first was the literature stage. This stage began when a child was 6 or 7 years old and consisted of basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. The next stage was the grammaticus stage. This stage began around the age of 10 years old and was about 4 to 5 years in length. At this point, children were completely bilingual in Latin and Greek and began reading and memorizing more intermediate literature. The third and final stage of the Roman education system was the rhetor stage, which began at the age of 14 or 15. This stage was primarily reserved for the wealthy and consisted of a form of study abroad. That is all for my learnings about Roman period. Thank you for listening.
What a great explanation, Miss Lim. For our next guest, we have Miss Dublan for the Arabic period.
Assalamualaikum. So I want to discuss what I researched about, Islam education. So first, the Islam rose the most important concern of education was to cultivate the religious commitment of Islamic beliefs. And you know that they believe that education should be in accordance with the teachings of Allah. Just like Catholic, they believe in God. So let's talk about the curriculum. They have two types of curriculum, which is primary education and higher education. They call the primary as maktabs, which regards of basic education such as reading, writing, arithmetic, basic values, and more. And the second is the higher education. They called it as madrasa. So, unlike maktabs, madrasa focuses more on values, beliefs, and cultures. They deepen their study of the Quran and Islamic laws. And therefore, Arabic education are about acquiring intellectual knowledge through the application of, reason, logic, and developing spiritual knowledge that derive from divine revelation and spiritual experience. So, they're attending mosques to show their repentance, traditions, and love, and how they love their beliefs. So, I hope you learned something about me, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Dublan. For our next guest that we will tackle about the medieval period, let's welcome Miss Baraka.
So, how are you, Maria?
I'm always good.
You may now explain what's the education during the medieval period.
The school were concerned with the development of religious commitment, knowledge, and ritual to establish order. Only the wealthy had access to educations, and then usually only for boys. There were no public schools, and those who had the privilege of getting an education usually either learned at home with a tutor or from a school run by the church.
Now, I'm the one who explain what's the educational system during Renaissance period. Renaissance is the fervent period of European cultural, artistic, political, and economic rebirth of the following Middle Ages. Renaissance education was more focused on the rediscovery of classical philosophy, literatures, and arts. Also, their education was created with the humanist ideals, which emphasized the reasoning and scientific inquiry rather the importance of believing God and oftenly rejects. Let's now proceed to our next guest via online. Let's welcome Miss Janre Make, and she will be giving us idea about education during Reformation period.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for having me to your show. I am having an exciting time today, guys, because I am really excited to share my knowledge about education during the Reformation period.
So the Reformation began when Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses on the door of Castle Church in the Wittenberg, Germany, on October 31, 1517. Aren't you wondering why the Reformation was called Reformation? It came from the root word reform, or in simple words, change. So 95 Theses contents were about the condemnation of Luther about the excesses and corruption of Roman Catholic that time, especially the indulgence, or asking for payment to be forgiven of the sins they committed. So Martin Luther is also known as the father of modern education. They are aiming to the idea of giving the community the freedom of to have their interpretation of the Bible, and not only depending on what the priest interpretation, or for everyone to be enabled to know how to read specifically the Bible, to think clearly and critically, which leads to reformation of education. The reformers believed that education should be for everyone and not only for the well-off family, and the one should be responsible for that is their parents and the church leaders, because Martin Luther wants to let the people to have education along with also learning the scriptures or the Bible, and not only to be engaged with the Bible but also in writing catechism or the religious manual, theology, or about the foundations of the scripture. And they also desire that education is for all gender and status. Yet, in this education, learning Latin, Greek, mathematics, and as well science, the Christian teaching is the priority. In short, it is the developing of the heart of the people at the same time, their knowledge and their skills.
Burman's na! I'm back! Shopping, beep, 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 bing, bang, bang, super shopping day. Free shopping, bing, 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 bing. Shopping, bang, bang, super shopping day. Shopping, beep, 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 bing, bang, bang, super shopping day. Free shopping, bing, 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 bing. Shopping, bang, bang, super shopping day. Shopping, beep, 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 bing, bang, bang, super shopping day. Ayos ba? Maaga na ang Pasko sa 99 Super Shopping Day. Shop na!
Welcome back again, guys, to our show. Now, for our next guest that we will be tackle about the Philippine history, please welcome Miss Soriano. Ayan, welcome Miss Soriana. So, Miss Soriana, how are you?
Buenas tardes, konnichiwa, magandang araw, or should I say hello everyone? I'm grateful to be part of this show. Now, let me give you a bit information about the educational system here in the Philippines during pre-colonial period after the post-colonial. During the pre-colonial period, education in the Philippines was decentralized. Students were provided with vocational training but little in the way of traditional academics. The Philippine schools were headed by parents or by their tribal tutors. There was no formal schooling. Mothers, for example, educate their female children in housekeeping, weaving, and some other agriculture-related activities, while fathers train their male children in hunting, carpentry, agriculture, mining, and the likes. Since there was no formal schooling, children learned inside the comfort of their own house or inside the community. And because we don't have an established form of government, it became a reason why Spanish colonization happened that affects our society a lot. During the early period of colonization of Spain here in the Philippines, education was mostly run by the church. Spanish friars and missionaries educated the natives and converted indigenous populations to the Catholic faith. The character of education during Spanish colonization is that primary instruction was made free and the teaching of Spanish was compulsory. Primary schools, colleges, and universities were established in our country by the missionaries. The principal aim of Spain in the Philippines during the regime was to make the native Filipinos obedient and God-fearing Christians. During the entire period of Spanish rule in the Philippines, education was controlled by the Catholic Church. The education in the Philippines during the American regime from 1898 to 1942 consists of three main levels which include elementary level, secondary or high school level, and tertiary which is college level. And religion was not a part of the curriculum of the schools. The educational goals during American period is to promote democratic ideas and way of life, formation of good citizens, including the rights and responsibilities of people. Volunteer American soldiers were the first Filipino teachers and their goal was to build classrooms in every place where they assigned. This time, the proper way of schooling started, and when we learned the real value of education in the way that we are able to build our own established form of government that we have today. When the time of Japanese occupation from 1942 to 1945, the war interrupted schooling for most, as schools were destroyed or seized for military use. Because of striving for the diffusion of the Japanese language in the Philippines and the termination of the use of English in schools, the teaching of Tagalog, Philippine history, and character education was reserved for Filipino. And during this period, Philippine literature in English was stopped and writers turned to writing in Filipino, fostering a new Filipino culture based on the consciousness of the people and Orientals, elevating the moral of the people, giving a overemphasis on materialism, love for work and dignity of labor was emphasized. Though Philippines had suffered great loss of life and tremendous physical destruction by the time the war is over, the good thing is that Japan has helped construct and improve infrastructure in the Philippines. This includes major arterial highways, bridges, airports, railways, and ports. The post-colonial period, education aimed at the full realization of the democratic ideals and way of life. Curricular includes the life works and writings of Jose Rizal, especially the Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. Daily flag ceremony was made permanent under RA 1079. Elementary education was nationalized and matriculation fees were abolished. During the Commonwealth period, vocational and adult education were given emphasis. It was also during the Commonwealth era that an organized effort to develop a common national language was started in compliance with the mandate of 1935 Constitution along with the pre-education in public school. The focus of education during Commonwealth period is to develop moral character,
personal discipline, civil conscience, and vocational efficiency to teach the duties of citizenship. Curricular emphasis was on character education and citizenship training.
So now we will be having a fast talk about the education around the world. Let's start with Miss Oriana.
What's education during Renaissance period?
Education in Renaissance period centered around the early discovery of lost ideas leading to rebirth of civilization. What's the life of women during the Greek period?
In Greek period, girls manage household chores. Next is, what is the life of boys during medieval?
Only boys had the privilege to be educated during the medieval period. How was the educational system in the Philippines during colonization era?
During the early times, the education in the Philippines was poor because we don't have permanent education system, but then we established a form of government that support education very well. Thank you for listening.